Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Jesus Podcast, a podcast for everyday Christians seeking to follow Jesus every day. I am your host, Brian Boswell. Thanks for joining us today on this special episode. You're going to listen to a sermon that I preached back in July of this year. The title of the sermon is The Book of Job, Why Do Bad Things Happen? I hope you enjoy.
So on my way in this morning, I got here at like 7:30 to help set up. There was a big accident on 70 here right before we got to the Walmart. I don't know if you guys saw that this morning. And I couldn't tell how bad it was, but as I'm driving up the road, you could see lots of lights. Did anybody see how bad it was? Pretty bad accident. So I don't know if you caught the theme for the day so far, have you? Nobody planned this theme, I don't think, but I've heard the theme throughout, so maybe we'll hear it later too. But when I'm driving up the road, I look in my rearview mirror and I'm in the right lane because I have to turn right into that little road that takes us around here to the daycare. And I look and there's two vehicles following me. I guess they thought that I knew some sort of secret shortcut to get around this accident. So they follow me all the way into the daycare parking lot, and I pull into a parking space, and then they look completely lost. And then they turn around, and then they drive back, and then I see them going down the road there. But I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about, one of the fruits of the Spirit is that the gift of, or the fruit of, long-suffering, right? And some of us will do just about anything, including following some random guy into a daycare parking lot to avoid what we perceive to be a little bit of suffering, right? We don't want to sit in the line of traffic to wait to get through the accident while someone else obviously was suffering right there on the side of the road, right? But we avoid suffering because we're scared of it, or we don't want it. It's hurtful, it's painful. Suffering is one of those things that we don't like to talk about. We don't talk about it much in church. We're more than overcomers. We're conquerors in Christ, all those things. But we don't want to talk about what happens or why is it that we suffer. We're gonna look at just an overview, and normally when I preach, I like to preach just like pick a couple verses and go from there. But we're gonna look at an overview of the book of Job. Now, how many of you are familiar with the book of Job? Right? What's the story with the book of Job? What's the meaning behind the book of Job? Anybody want to take a stab at it? I wouldn't either, because it's tough, right? It's tough. So when we read the book of Job, we're left with a lot, we're getting a lot of questions throughout the book of Job. But the book of Job, let me clear kind of one thing up. It's called the book of Job, but it's not primarily about Job. I know that's kind of backwards, but it's not primarily about Job. It's primarily about God. Just like every book of the Bible. The Bible is God's revelation to us, so it's teaching us about God. So when we read the book of Job, a lot of times we read it the wrong way. We're reading it from Job's perspective and not from God's perspective. So as we read this book, we should be seeking to find out what God wants us to know. What is God revealing to us through the life of this man named Job? Now, first and foremost, the book of Job it's a book of poetry. It's actually Hebrew poetry. If we could read Hebrew, I bet you it sounds really pretty, but in English it doesn't look that way. It doesn't rhyme. That's the poetry I'm used to. Roses are red, violets are blue. I love you, autumn, and say I do. I don't know. But the book of Job is possibly one of the oldest books of the Bible. We don't really have a dating on it, but it's a wisdom book. So there are 5 wisdom books in the Bible. Can anybody name them all?
Proverbs, Ecclesiastes.
That's two. Good job. Psalms. Song of Solomon. And then Book of Job. So it's not like every other book in the Bible. It tells the story of a man named Job who may have lived prior to Abraham. He was not a Jewish man. He was a man from the land of Uz, which was not in the land of Israel. And the name Job may have been derived from the Arabic word which means repentant one. The book of Job presents us with a question. Why do good people suffer? Now, some of us may have been asking that question this week. Why do good people suffer? Why do bad things happen? If you've ever visited anyone in the hospital, you might ask that question. But the suffering that we're talking about is not just simply a suffering it's got to be this monumental suffering, but sometimes we all suffer within our own lives. We might suffer with, you might lose a loved one. You might lose, you might just have a bad teacher in school. And you have to suffer through a year of a bad teacher. You might have a bad family life. Maybe it's just not great in your house. Maybe you grew up without a dad. Maybe you grew up with a dad who didn't like you. Maybe your kids don't act right sometimes. Suffering can come in all different types and forms. So I don't want it to be limited to just one type of suffering. I don't want us to think about the worst suffering that we can have. But this suffering that we're asking about is why does it happen? Why do we have suffering? And the book of Job, it presents us with a couple of questions. Is God just? Is God just? Why do bad things happen to good people? We ask that question quite a bit, don't we? We could ask that about Craig, right? We could say, why is this happening to our friend? We could ask that about Bob. Bob's one of the best people you'll ever meet. Why is this happening? Why? So we're going to look at the book of Job, and we're going to try and get some answers from the book of Job. So the book of Job opens with a description of Job. He's blessed, and most of you know this story, right? He's got 7 sons, 3 daughters, 3,000 camels. I can't even imagine the number of camels this man had. Like, where did he put them all? 3,000 camels, 7,000 sheep. That's a lot of sheep. 500 yoke of oxen. To say that he was blessed is an understatement. Job had everything. I mean, he was one of the most blessed people on the earth. I don't know if we could put this into our perspective, but he was extraordinarily blessed. The next scene in the book of Job takes place in heaven's court. And we see this kind of scene set up. The God's kind of sitting there on the throne. The sons of man are around him, or the sons of God are around him. And then we are presented with this interesting passage. So we're going to start with verse 6 in chapter 1. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with him. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything that he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now, stretch out your hand and strike everything that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything that he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So notice in verse 8 that God calls Job blameless. He couldn't call me that, right? Like, Job was a man of unique, in this Bible reference, he's unique because he's blameless. He's upright. It didn't say that, Job had his problems, if the story was the book of Brian, it would start off that way. Well, have you considered my servant Brian? He's got his problems, and say, like, yeah, we know each other. It's like, but he says the book of Job. He says Job was blameless. So you want to talk about why do good things happen or why do bad things happen to good people? Well, look at Job. He was a good person. God himself calls him good. God calls him good. And then, so, Satan, who's always the what? The accuser, comes forward and he accuses Job. And he says, if it weren't for all the stuff that you give him, he would curse you. You protected him, you protected his family, he's got a good life. So this is kind of setting the stage for what's going to happen. And we're going to pick up in verse 13. So we find out what happens. And if you've read the story, this isn't any surprise to you. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who escaped to tell you. It just keeps getting worse, doesn't it? While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. That's 3,000 camels, remember? And I am the only one that's escaped to tell you this. And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up, tore his robe, shaved his head, and then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Job loses everything. He loses everything. His camel, his oxen, his sheep, probably more importantly, his sons and his daughters. All of them. Yeah. He rips his clothes, shaves his head. That's mourning. That's a sign of mourning. But he doesn't sin. That's what the Bible says. He doesn't sin. He says, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, but blessed be the name of the Lord. How many of us in that situation would say the same thing? I don't know. I don't know if I can. But it's not over, because it's not over for Job, right? It gets worse. Now, Job held fast to his faith, but Satan accuses him again before God. So we're in 2:3. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. And I think we'd all agree at this point that God's telling the truth about servant Job. There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity. Though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all that he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. He replied, You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. I mean, this story, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? It really is. Satan comes in, we know what the devil seeks to do, right? He seeks to steal, He stands before God, he's accusing Job again. He says, Hey, look, you took all his stuff, but he's still healthy. A man will give all that he has for his own life. So God allows this to happen again. Now I want you to keep in mind that Job does not see what we see. So we're seeing this scene in heaven's court. Job doesn't see this. Job's looking at it as all of a sudden I've lost everything. I've lost everything that I've had, and now I've lost my health. And in the midst of that, the one person that's supposed to be there for what? For sickness and health, for richer, for poorer, for better and for worse, what does she say? Curse God and die. That's real encouraging, isn't it? That's a lesson for the spouses in the room. Don't do that. Sometimes the Bible's confusing, sometimes it's not. This is one of those times. Don't do that. Okay? You don't have to do anything but better than that. And you've done something, right? I mean, there ain't got to be a whole lot, but don't do that. It's terrible. Job is left with nothing. Except what? A bunch of questions. Why is this happening to me? Why am I suffering? Can any of you guys relate to Job? Sitting there, suffering, whatever's happened in your life, and you're going, why? Why is this happening? I've been there. So Job has 3 friends show up. They show up, they've obviously heard what's happened to Job, they tear their garments, and then they sit in silence with Job for 7 days and 7 nights. Sit there, mourning with him. You got friends that's going to sit with you for 7 days and 7 nights? So he's joined by 3 of his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And this next section of the book, we're not going to be able to go. There's 42 chapters to the book of Job. I will not go through all 42 chapters today. I will promise that we will get out of here before that happens. But it goes through 3 cycles where Job says something and his friends respond, and then they go back and forth. And they do that 3 times. So it's a cyclical nature to the book. And Job's friends believe that bad things happen because of why? Because there's some sort of hidden sin in your life. So Eliphaz says, As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. That's chapter 4, verse 8. So what is that saying? That's something that all of us kind of believe, isn't it? Isn't that something that we all believe? That, hey, if you go out and you do bad stuff, bad things happen. If you go out and do good stuff, good things happen, right? I mean, that's a simple... Eliphaz isn't saying anything that none of us would say. Hey, look, man, you must have done something wrong because why else would all this happen to you? All at one time. He's thinking like we're thinking. Bildad agrees, saying, if you are pure and upright, even now He, God, will arouse Himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Basically, if you've done nothing wrong, then God's going to get up and He's going to give you everything back. He's going to take care of you. That's what He's saying. And then so far as if you put away the sin that is in your hand and allow no evil to dwell in your tent, then, free of fault, you will lift up your face and you will stand firm and without fear. These are just small selections. These guys are going on and on and on about this stuff. But these are just small selections so that you know what the story is. But he says, if you put away the sin that is in your hand, obviously, Job, you've done something wrong. You got to figure out what that thing is. What's that sin in your hand? And let it go. Give it up. Job's friends believe what is commonly called as divine retribution. Okay? That if you do something bad, God's just waiting for you. He's sitting there behind the bush. Ah! Gotcha! Right? That's what we kind of believe that, don't we? We believe that God's just waiting in the wings to punish us. You suffer because you've done something wrong. That's what we believe. So when we see people suffering, in the back of our minds, if we're a little bit honest, sometimes we think, they must have did something. They must have did something. Your friend gets in a car accident, your friend does this, your friend ends up, they must have did something. Right? And if we're going to be completely honest with you, everybody, is it okay to be honest? Is it okay to be honest? Because I think that way. I'm not saying that I'm the right. I'm just telling you that's how I think. You suffer because you have some sort of unconfessed sin. You've done something wrong. But I want to look at how Job responds. Job answers. And these are some, if you're going to memorize a couple of verses this week, these two right here at the top would be right there on my list. Job 13:15 says, though he slay me, I will hope in him. Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Can we say that today? Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Job 19:25, as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will take his stand on the earth. What is he saying right there? He says that I will be redeemed. I may not believe it. I don't understand what's going on. I may not understand why God's got me in this, but I will be redeemed. I will be taken care of. I will be rescued. You remember we sang the song earlier. I called, you came, you rescued me, right? That's what we believe. We're here with Job. But Job also, you got to think, this guy's on an emotional roller coaster, right? So sometimes he would answer, yes, though you slay me, my hope is in you, Jesus. But then sometimes he's more like us, right? Where he says something like this, would he contend with me by the greatness of his power? No. Surely he would pay attention to me. He's looking for God to come and speak to him. Job starts demanding that God come down and answer him. Anybody ever been there before? Where God, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why you got me here, but I demand that you come down here and tell me what's going on. Anybody said that? I've said it. I've been in a bad spot before, and you don't know what's going on, and the whole world is falling apart around you, and you're like, why is this happening? Why does these things keep happening? Last week it was this, and then the car broke down, and then this week I go out to the car and it's got a flat tire. I drive the car on a donut wheel to get to work on time. I get to work on time, and the boss man fires me. Come down here and talk to me. What is going on? That's Job. Why does this happen? I demand a meeting with you, God. I know it's quiet because I think we've all said these things. I think we've all said these things. When bad things happen, that's when our faith is being tested, right? When bad things are going, we're going, what is going on? God, I just need to know what is going on. Job's hope was always in his Redeemer, but he did question. I want you to see that. Because I think as Christians, sometimes we don't know that it's okay. But listen, if Job, blameless and upright Job, questioned God in the midst of this thing, listen, these things can happen. Okay? It doesn't mean that God doesn't love you. It doesn't mean that God isn't there with you. But God is still God. Okay? And then we're going to see a little bit more of this. But in our darkest places, God is with us. Our darkest places. It doesn't matter where your dark place is. It doesn't matter where you find yourself, whether you put yourself there or not, God is still there. God is still there. He doesn't leave you or... Psalm 23. Anybody know that one by heart? Somebody want to recite it? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of... Right? What is that song? What is that? That's a song that comforts us, right? That even in our darkest places, even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall not fear, because you are with me. Right? You are with me. You didn't leave me. You didn't leave me. The story continues. It's not over. We'll talk about like strange things that happens in stories. Another man just shows up out of nowhere in the story. His name's Elihu. Another one of Job's friends. He burns with anger at Job and his friends. He's a young man who thinks that mankind cannot know while we suffer. Stand and consider the wonders of God. Do you know how God establishes them? That's what he says to Job. But it's just empty words. Right? In the midst of our suffering, we don't necessarily want to know. We don't want to talk about these pithy statements. We just want God to show up, right? God shows up. But here's the plot twist of the book of Job. God doesn't answer Job. Job is crying out, why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? Why are bad things everywhere around me? God doesn't answer it. He answers him this way. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place? Any of you guys? Do you know the time the mountain goats give birth? I mean, he asks some hard questions. I don't know the time the mountain goats give birth. I guess we could Google it now, right? Maybe. What's God's point through all this, though? There is no simple answer as to why we suffer. And we find out that the story of Job isn't about suffering. It's about trusting God. The world is so complex. It's so complex when you start thinking about we're sitting on a round sphere in space, moving at like Mach 87. The Earth's turning at like 87,000 miles per hour or something like that. And we're still standing here. We're not being thrown over. And it's being turned around the sun. That there's other little objects out in space all just turning around the same thing. And then there's this magnificent galaxy. And all the way down to the follicles of your hair. When we look at God, everything is within His hand. And that's His point. He goes, I know the time that the mountain goats give birth. I was there when I established the earth. I caused the dawn. So that brings us to the real question. The real question isn't, why do we suffer in the book of Job? It's, do we trust God in our suffering? Because all of us, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a super Christian or you just got saved yesterday. All of us are in the same boat. That means we're all likely going to suffer at some point. So the question is not, why do we suffer? The question is, do you trust God in your suffering? Do you trust God completely? Do you give Him everything? Or are you holding something back? What are you doing? Are you trusting God with everything that you have? Because see, this is what the book of Job is about. Job lost everything. He lost everything. And he's asking why? Why is this happening? When he should have said, God, I just trust you. I put my trust in you. I don't understand why this is happening. I believe that there's a bigger reason for why this is happening. I don't know it. He didn't see the heavenly courtroom scenes, remember? Job wasn't privy to that knowledge. We were given that knowledge, but Job wasn't given that knowledge. From his perspective, all he can do is ask why. But that's not the question. The question is do you trust God in the midst of what you're going through? Do you trust God with your situation? Do you trust God that He is good? That God loves you despite the suffering that you might be going through? Do you really trust God in those situations? That's the question that we all have to ask. Hold on. God knows what He's doing. And Job repents. Job repents. Remember his name? Repentant one? Job repents. I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Therefore, I retract and I repent in dust and ashes. He was questioning God. He was questioning why all these bad things were happening. And he repents. After that, God chastises Job's friends and demands a sacrifice and burnt offering, and the Lord accepted Job. God's requirement of a sacrifice and burnt offering, what does that point us to? It points us to the gospel. When we suffer, we would be wise to remember that we are joining in with Christ who suffered and died for us. We are joining in with Him in His sufferings. Jesus is the better Job, because Jesus, He suffered, yet He did not question God. He didn't do anything wrong. He was perfect in every way. And the Bible describes Him like a lamb led to the slaughter. Jesus was the better Job. We are told in various trials and tribulations that we are to count it all. That's hard. Right? That's hard. So I want to leave you with this thought. 2 Corinthians 4, 17 and 18. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is temporary, or since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So I'm going to ask Josh to come back, and I'd like to do that song that we did at the end, to the very end. I didn't know he was, I've never even heard this song before. But this was a song that he gave us. But the words to that song, it says, "You know me and I know you. You're the God who calms all my storms. You're the voice inside of my head saying, don't give up. Don't let go. Don't lose trust. Don't lose hope. You can have all my fears, God. You can have all my sins. You can have all my weakness. I know you're with me to the very end." So the message this morning, if I could tell you just in a nutshell, is trust God. No matter where you're at, no matter what's going on, no matter if you're praying for Bob and Jackie, or someone else, or maybe a situation in your own life, don't give up. Don't let go. Don't lose trust. And don't lose hope. So let's pray.
So I want to thank you for joining us today. If you have some feedback, please send us an email at feedback@everydayjesus.net. Please like and share our page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Consider being a club member. It costs just $5 a month. We're looking to help cover the podcast hosting cost and the website charges. And you can always visit our website for free resources and content, everydayjesus.net. I hope you have a very blessed week.